Welcome to another episode of Dolphins In Depth. I'm Omar Kelly, Miami Herald Dolphins columnist, and today I'm joined by my colleague Barry Jackson, Mr. Do Everything, who was out there at Heat's final closing exit interview day. It's funny that the Heat kind of find themselves in the exact same spot the Miami Dolphins did, falling flat late in the season because of injuries. But now the question is, how do you rebuild and rebrand that team? And the Miami Dolphins did something today, which I find quite intriguing because in the week that followed the NFL draft, we know NFL teams start to add talent in terms of free agents that they sign. And the Miami Dolphins did something that was kind of out of left field from my perspective in terms of signing one of the top free agents still available on the market in Odell Beckham Jr., signing him to a one-year deal that really has a $3 million base, but has $5.25 million in incentives that he could potentially reach. Barry, how do you take this Odell Beckham signing?
I take this, Omar, as a perfect example of what can happen if Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel are patient. So you have to commend them because it paid off. Beckham came in having earned close to $15 million last year, wanting something far closer to that, far closer than what the Dolphins initially offered, which was a $3 million base. And the Dolphins said to themselves, you know what, we're going to wait it out. Let's see if another team gives Odell Beckham this kind of money. We can afford to wait because if worse comes to worse, at least we've upgraded at slot receiver. We've upgraded tight end with Jonnu Smith. So even though we want an accomplished number 3 receiver, we could survive if we don't get one. So what happened was a month and a half later, Beckham received no other offer that was significantly more. Someone indicated to me he got an offer that was a little bit more, but certainly not much more than $3 million base. And I think, Omar, this is also a good example of Mike McDaniel's strength as a coach. He does two things especially well. One is creativity as an offensive play caller and game planner, and the other is cultivating relationships with players. And look how it helped in this case. He started calling Odell Beckham, I was told, about a week before the meeting down here, just telling him, I love your game. It would fit in so well here with Tyreek and Jalen and Tua. We'd love to have you. I'd be the ideal coach for you, et cetera, et cetera. And that worked with Odell because McDaniel comes off as genuine, right? And someone who you want to play for and likable. And that had an impact on Odell, I was told, over the last few weeks, especially when it became clear that no one was going to offer him close to that $15 million range. To you, what does this do? How much of an upgrade is it over what they had last year? Obviously, Cedric Wilson primarily, a little bit of Claypool, a little bit of Robbie Chosen.
Oh, it's a tremendous upgrade. I initially, when I found out that the Miami Dolphins were intrigued by Odell Beckham and brought him in for a visit, I initially said, this doesn't make any sense. And then I went to look at the film and watch Odell's play in Baltimore, watch his contribution, watch his roles in Harbaugh's offense, watch how he played with Lamar Jackson. And I was floored at how good, well, crisp, and how he seemed like a perfect fit for what this offense needed and what they were missing. They put him a lot of times in the slot. He ran tough seam routes. He ran crossers. He ran comebacks. And really, it's the routes that while Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle could run, they're not necessarily ideal to run. Both are spacers. Both can do everything. I'm not going to tell you that Tyreek Hill doesn't have a complete route tree because Tyreek Hill is probably the generational player of wide receivers for this era of wide receivers. I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. There is no weakness in this game outside of the fact he can't stay out of trouble. But I will say this. There are certain routes I don't want him running. And if you put Odell Beckham in this offense, primarily attacking the seam, working in the slot when Tyreek's not going in the slot, probably going out to split end or flanker when Tyreek or Jalen are inside, working in the red zone, doing those jump balls. I mean, the catch radius is massive. The hands, I'm excited to see. This sounds weird. Pause. I'm excited to see Odell's hands in person, Barry, because I've heard they're like catcher's mitts. I've heard they are Oronde Gadsden-esque. And so I'm very intrigued to see what he can bring to this offense and how quickly it's going to take him to learn it.
And I know it's not obviously the vintage Odell in his prime, but you can't overlook the yards per catch last year, which was 8th in the league. So he's still able to make the most out of his 35 catches last year. And here's the other thing. I think you made this point, Omar, before we teamed up about a week ago. At some point this offseason, the Dolphins receivers at times had trouble getting off press coverage at times. Obviously, it was clear to everyone couldn't separate enough consistently from corners. Obviously, I'm talking about receivers 3 through 7. I'm not talking about Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But you think back to games last year where Cedric Wilson, bless his heart, he gave you more than you probably expected last year, but he couldn't consistently get open when you needed him to. Obviously, the Robbie Chosen thing didn't work out. He had the one long TD catch in the blowout of Denver. Otherwise, didn't really hear from him. And the Claypool thing was a total debacle. I mean, he handled himself really well. He was a total team guy after being acquired here, but either the Dolphins couldn't maximize his skills or maybe the skills were overstated. So at least now you have a reliable third guy if Tyreek or Jalen is injured. And more importantly, you have a guy who can get open and can create separation on third downs when Tyreek and Jalen are blanketed either by really good man corners or if they face the too high safety look again, right? At least then maybe Odell will be able to get something underneath.
Not just that, but the red zone weapon. I mean,
Exactly.
when we talk, look at the red zone and look, how many fades are we really going to run to 5'10" receivers or 5'11"? Let me be more generous. To me, that was probably the one missing element from this offense because I think you can make do with everything else except for that red zone weapon. Now, I also have Jody Fortson in there and Jonnu Smith as players who can help elevate how they can execute in the red zone or diversify the amount of plays that they can call or the type of plays that they can call. But when we're just looking at this Odell Beckham signing, it is a drastic, when I say drastic, I mean tremendously drastic improvement over Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft and Eric Uzukama when you're talking about that number 3 receiver. While a lot of those guys have proven that they're NFL players and they bring certain strengths and to the table, we're talking about a 10-point improvement if we're talking about mythological Madden ratings in terms of Odell Beckham. And that's not Odell Beckham in his prime. That's Odell Beckham, at an elevated age, coming off significant injuries. But then a lot of people overstate the injuries from my perspective. When you suffer a knee injury, it takes some time for you to come back from it. And now Odell Beckham sat out the 2022 season, came back in 2023. That means right now he's entering his 3rd year. Well, not really 3rd year because he suffered the injury in February, but he's approaching his 2nd year fully healthy, coming off a knee injury. Everybody has this perception that players who are 30 plus are washed in the NFL. I don't. I think it's more of a mileage thing in terms of how many seasons have you played, how many snaps have you played. And if you look at Odell Beckham's odometer, it's relatively low because of the lack of mileage that he's had on his body, because of all the injuries that he's had. Now, the question is, can he survive an entire NFL season? And I don't doubt that he can when you look at it from the standpoint, they're not asking him to play 1,000 snaps, Barry. I mean, if we're going to be aggressive, we're looking at a 600, maybe 700 snap count if he's filling in for injured players moving forward.
Unquestionably. And here was the other thing I thought of today, Omar. This reduces dramatically the snaps you're going to need your natural slot receivers to play. I just don't see an avenue, barring injuries, for a lot of playing time for Berrios or Craycraft. Maybe the 2 Washington kids, the draft picks who have everyone excited. Maybe they'll get in the rotation. But you're looking at creating snaps in passing downs for Jonnu Smith. Last year, the Dolphins played 2 tight ends only 12% of the time, 2nd least in the league. You're obviously going to see more than that with Jonnu Smith and Durham Smythe in some third down situations. You're going to see Odell on the field with Tyreek and with Waddle, and you're always going to keep a back in either for protection or the fact that Mostert and Achane are effective receivers out of the backfield. So there's not really a need to play natural 4 wide receiver sets next year. Do you think we could go much of the year without seeing a natural 4th receiver on the field on most passing downs, be it Berrios, be it Craycraft, be it one of the Washington kids?
Oh, absolutely. I don't even think that was a package that was used heavily last year, especially
Exactly.
they weren't trailing. Miami's a very big team when it comes to tight ends that help in as an extra blocker, or the fullback that helps as an extra blocker, or keeping Raheem on the field to clean up some protection issues, especially from a blitz standpoint. Right now, if I'm looking at the Dolphins starting lineup, it's probably going to go a 3 receiver set that features Odell Beckham. When I'm saying the best that they have to offer, Jonnu Smith is my tight end number 1, just because he adds a different element to the offense than Durham Smythe does. I think he's an adequate, if not above adequate blocker. So I'm definitely elevating him when you're talking about a guy with 21 touchdowns in his career over what Durham Smythe has done. And this is no disrespect to Durham.
Of course, always have to preface it that way.
This is no disrespect to Durham. Very reliable, very consistent. I call him the janitor because he cleans up everything from an offensive standpoint, protection-wise. I mean, the amount of plays that he saves per game is at least 5, just from cleaning up the blitzes and things of that nature. And then we've got tight end, fullback Alec Ingold. You know, if I'm dicing it up, I'm going 12% of the offense to Ingold, who I think was underutilized, 12% of the offense to the 2 tight end package. The 2 back package with Achane and Mostert, I'm throwing about 20% of the offense to. And then we got the 3 receiver sets, which I think should get the bulk of that. I'm not a math major, but I'm probably thinking this is probably a 30 to 35% of this offense. Now, we will see how it all pans out when we get to OTAs and we get to training camp and who stays healthy. But when you look at the amount of packages that the Miami Dolphins have now in their offense, it supersedes anything that they went into last year with, because you've upgraded the number 3 receiver spot. Last year, I thought it would be Robbie Chosen. Clearly, it wasn't. Braxton Berrios fell short of expectations in terms of what he was able to contribute. People had warned me that, hey, I was overrating him a little bit. He's a marginal NFL player. No disrespect to him, but that's what he is. He's a decent returner, marginal NFL slot receiver. But now we drastically upgrade the number 3 position. We've got 2 dynamic backs in the backfield. That doesn't even factor in what Jalen Wright might be able to do as a 4th round pick from Tennessee. And then we got the 2 tight end sets, which we think is probably one of their favorite packages to use. Now, Mike McDaniel comes from the San Francisco program, where it was a heavy package in what they did and how they operated. And I think we'll see a lot of that moving forward now that they have 2 capable tight ends. Both of them can block. Well, while they had Mike Gesicki in the past, we all knew the situation with Mike Gesicki. When he came onto the field, you were telegraphing what they were doing, and that's a no-no for Mike McDaniel.
And that's not going to be the case now, because Jonnu Smith, if you look at the metrics, he's been a competent blocker. What I like is they've given Tua more answers to problems and questions. If teams were blanketing Tyreek and Jalen with 2 high safeties, there are answers now underneath with Jonnu Smith and Odell Beckham. They've improved in yak. Jonnu Smith is number 1 among all tight ends in yak over the last 4 years, even more than George Kittle. They've improved in terms of sure-handedness. And I'll tell you why. There was a tweet from Chris Kaufman, another Dolphins podcaster today, that noted the few number of drops of all their new receivers. Odell Beckham only 1 last year. Taj Washington at USC only 1. Malik Washington caught 110 at Virginia, dropped only 3. So they're more sure-handed. They have better yak after getting Jonnu Smith. They're going to be better at separation because of Odell Beckham and his knowledge of how to create space from opposing corners, and also just his natural skill set, which hasn't declined dramatically. So they've given Tua a lot more weapons. I think they've pretty much done as well as they possibly could from a weapon standpoint on offense this offseason. The only question that everyone's going to keep coming back to is, will the move from Connor Williams to Aaron Brewer and the move from Robert Hunt to whoever, that law firm of Liam, Rob Jones, and Jack Driscoll, will that be such a decline that it offsets the improvements they've made in adding Beckham, Jonnu Smith, and the Washington brothers, as we call them, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you, mentioning the Washington brothers, who were both late round draftees, 3rd day draftees for the Miami Dolphins. Let's lump in Eric Uzukama into this batch right now, because when you're talking about Tyreek, Jalen, ODB, then let's go Braxton Berrios because he's a return specialist. You kind of
Craycraft
only
then, just because of experience, maybe? Do you put River in fifth, and then as Zuccoman and then the Washington kids, that's seven? Then
I
Braylon
don't
Sanders on the fifth as always?
I don't know if River safely makes it on. I know he's a jack of all trades and can do everything and is a master of this offense, but you don't draft two slot receivers in the later rounds unless you feel like there's a need and there could potentially be an upgrade. How do you think that this addition of Odell Beckham impacts Uzukama, Craycraft, Malik Washington, Taj Washington?
Well, they're not going to play very much, but it does buy Ezekama more time as a developmental guy. Maybe, I hate to say a gimmicky guy, but it was very telling that before his neck injury last season, he was on the field more to run the ball in a very poor man's Deebo Samuel role than he was to catch the ball. So now, if he makes the team, and I think there's a better than 50-50 chance he will, if he does, he can still be used in those selective situations, maybe running the ball. Occasional passes his way when you need to go to a fourth boundary guy after Jalen, Tyreek, and Odell. So I think there'll be a few opportunities for him if he earns them during the offseason. But as far as slot snaps for guys other than Tyreek and Jalen and Odell, I think it's going to be very, very limited, barring injuries. I don't think we're going to see Berrios on the field as a receiver a ton if there aren't injuries. And look, if the Washington brothers excel in camp, there will be a package for them. There will be a role for them. But as excited as everyone is about them, and they're obviously considered better than your average 6th and 7th rounders, we still have to keep in mind that they lasted to the 6th and 7th round. And as you said, they're on the most loaded wide receiver team in the league. Tell the audience what Louis Riddick told you about Taj Washington. I found that interesting in your conversation with him as a 7th rounder at USC.
Yeah, he brought up the fact because I know Louis Riddick was a big Muhammad Muhammad Kamara fan, fan,
Got a Colorado State,
who's the Dolphins selection in the 5th round. He was one of the reasons where I actually had to pour over some of this young man's film, and outside of his size, which was 6'1", I was like, this is an NFL player, and he potentially could be an NFL starter. So I was surprised that the Dolphins got him in the 5th round, but Louis Riddick, who I have the highest level of respect for and have had it for years, when Louis speaks, I listen. He said that basically Taj Washington, not Malik Washington, not the earlier drafted Washington brother, but Taj Washington was his favorite player from the Dolphins draft because he believes he is a young man who is going to, one, add speed, create separation, and he's going to be a player who is going to fit into this offense and what they want to do and what they want to achieve succinctly. And I just found that extremely intriguing. Obviously, we're going to have to see what all of them do when they get here in camp. And the biggest journey or challenge that rookies have is learning the playbook. And as we've seen here in the last 2 years with Mike McDaniel, learning the playbook is a tremendous challenge for a lot of players, but especially for wide receivers, just because of the many roles and the many different spots that they're going to be needed to learn. I think what could help Taj Washington and Malik Washington is I actually heard Malik can be a flanker. Was having a conversation.
He played some boundary before, obviously beginning at Northwestern, then going on to Virginia. I'll tell you the thing, Omar, that really intrigues me about Malik Washington, the 6th rounder out of Virginia, even beyond the pure production, which is eye-opening, 110 catches, only 3 drops, the fact that he broke 35 tackles, led the nation in that. And what that shows you is even though he's diminutive in size at 5'8", 5'9", he's still got a strong lower base to be able to break tackles. So I found that encouraging. With Taj Washington, the thing that I liked is, besides the general productivity, just how consistent he was. His 3 years at USC, catches consistently in the 55 to 60 range. And by the way, Taj Washington, we have stories on both these guys at MiamiHerald.com as a shameless plug there. But Taj Washington, his deep ball numbers, catching passes last year from the number 1 overall pick in the draft, just mind-blowing. 15 out of 17 in terms of passes thrown over 20 air yards, 600 yards, 6 touchdowns. So besides being effective in underneath routes in the slot, Taj Washington, the 7th rounder, when he was playing with the new Bears quarterback, was incredible as a deep threat on long throws. So I think watching the two Washingtons is going to be one of the real fascinating things of the offseason program, even though they're probably not going to play very much barring injuries.
Yeah, well, they'll certainly play a lot in the exhibition season because I don't think we'll see much of Tyreek or Waddle. Let me segue this conversation, Barry, to I think an important topic, which is that $18.5 million that the Dolphins are going to get back once they get Xavier Howard's money off the books on June 1st. I really thought they would be more aggressive when they finally got that money. Obviously, it's good that they got the Odell Beckham deal done. Keep in mind, I don't think this impacts Tua's contract because more than likely Tua's contract is going to create cap space as opposed to diminish it. What do you think they can do, should do, need to do when they finally get that welfare check?
Well, I'm with you. I would make a call to Calais Campbell because, as we've talked about, I simply don't think they're good enough replacing Wilkins with the combination of Neville Gallimore and Jonathan Harris and Tart some. But remember, Tart's going to play primarily nose. I'm sure Anthony Weaver might be able to find a way to get him on the field and other opportunities. So my first call would be Calais Campbell. If he says no, or if they can't reach an agreement, then I would probably just try to make do with what you have at defensive tackle because there's no other great name out there. Hope that someone shakes free. Second thing I would do, and I know we're on the same page with this, sign one of those veteran safeties. You need a reliable third person. Jordan Poyer's getting into his mid-30s. You can't assume he's going to play every game. Holland is coming off a year where he had 2 injuries. You can't assume he's going to play every game. I know we both like Elijah Campbell's upside. We love him as a person. We love Nick Needham as a person, and he certainly has ability at safety. But just for the pure peace of mind issue, you need someone besides those 4. You need a veteran who could come in and be a number 3 and fill in if Poyer or Holland is out. And I want to make one other point to you with that $18 million. Obviously, a little bit's going to be needed for the draft picks. And then you're going to want to keep a few million in case you have injuries in August and you need to sign an Eli Apple. Hopefully not Eli Apple again, but someone like Eli Apple. Oops. But one other thing to keep in mind, they're down in 2025 cap space to below $5 million. Now, I know they can create a ton by cutting Armstead and others if they choose to go in the direction next year. But remember, that 2025 cap number does not include Tua's contract. Now, it does include the 5th-year options that were exercised for Waddle and Phillips, which are higher numbers. So you can get those down in long-term extensions. It doesn't include Holland either. So they're already down to very little cap space in 2025 without Tua or Holland being accounted for at all. So that's a long way of saying you could make the case that if they're not interested in Calais Campbell, or if it's just not a fit, and if they can't sign a safety for cheap money, maybe – I know Dolphins fans won't want to hear this. Maybe you carry over the space because you're going to need it. I personally think that's the way it's going to end up going in terms of a lot of that $18.5 million, I think is going to be carried over to next year unless they have just a flood of injuries this season. And I think even then, still sign a safety. One of these safeties is going to be cheap. These names that you've mentioned is going to fall through the cracks and be cheap, whether it's a Jamal Adams, whether it's a Micah Hyde. Is that a sensible plan to you, or would you do a little something different?
No, definitely Calais Campbell. I think if you add Calais Campbell, you're making your team. He's not going to be cheap. I doubt Calais comes out of his bedroom for less than $6 million a year. I think that helps you solidify what I look at as the most unstable part of your team, which is your defense and your defensive front. Now, safety, I'm just getting a little bit greedy. If Calais tells me no, I instantly turn my attention to Justin Simmons, who I think is mind-numbing and puzzling why he's still a free agent out there. I don't know what his desire to play is. I don't know what his interest is. Maybe he's like Xavier Howard and he's saying title contenders only. Everybody else, I'm not interested. I'm trying to get myself a ring and secure my legacy. But I don't necessarily think that it's a major need because I think they secretly think that Ethan Bonner can play safety. He's the dime package cornerback. The way this cornerback unit is shaking up, I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a seamless fit. Maybe Nick Needham goes in as a fourth safety. There's the kid from Buffalo who was added.
Saran Neal.
Yeah, Saran Neal. I have no idea what he is, where he is, or how he could be used. Maybe he's a safety in practice. we'll see when they unleash OTAs and open it up for us. But to me, the priority, and I know a lot of people are obsessed about the guard situation. I think that can wait. I know that sounds sacrilegious and just absolutely ludicrous, considering my choices are now Jack Driscoll and Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones and Isaiah Wynn. But I think patience. This organization has showed that they can be patient. For all we know, Dalton Reisner is not signing for anything less than $4 million. He signed like the week before the season started and ended up Minnesota's starter. So I think we can be a little bit patient with that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward, especially with aged veterans who are not interested in participating in OTAs like Campbell.
Yeah,
so
I agree. And it's been admirable that Greer has been patient. It's hard sometimes for fans to be patient because you see a need that you think is glaring, like number 3 receiver guard, and you see your team not filling it. But one of the parts of being a qualified general manager is to be able to show discipline at times. And that's one thing Chris Greer has shown, no question. I feel really good about the team, except for defensive tackle. I think you and I are on the same page there. I just felt it was worthy of more attention. And I know they feel like having a bunch of big physical bodies who have had some NFL success, like Gallimore and Harris and Tart, will address the position enough. But it just concerns me that certain teams, they're going to be vulnerable to being gouged by the run. And until I see with my own eyes that this group of mostly backup players, plus Zach Sealer, is good enough to consistently stop the run against physical offensive fronts and teams with good running games, until I see it with my own 2 eyes, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical, because I don't think Wilkins' loss can be understated. No, he wasn't the best defensive tackle against the run. He wasn't the best defensive tackle as a pass rusher until last year. But between the 2 of them and his durability and his reliability, that was a huge loss that I think they have not sufficiently addressed. That, to me, is the biggest concern with this roster.
Definitely. Well, Barry, we appreciate you for joining us on Dolphins in Depth, and we will be back more on Tuesday with another episode.